A sensitive investigation inside Nigeria's military has now reached the president's desk. The armed forces have submitted to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu the report of their inquiry into the detention of senior officers accused of serious breaches of military regulations, including allegations linked to a coup plot. For months, official statements denied that any coup attempt existed, describing the arrests as internal disciplinary matters. Now, according to multiple security and presidency sources, the report submitted to the president tells a different story. This development raises difficult questions, not just about discipline within the armed forces, but about transparency, due process, and civil-military relations in a democracy. The issue is no longer about rumors. It is about what happens after an investigation confirms serious allegations inside a professional military. So the key question we need to examine is this. What does the submission of this report mean for Nigeria's military discipline system, and how should a democratic government respond to such allegations? According to multiple security and presidency sources, the Nigerian military has submitted to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu the report of its investigation into the detention of 16 military officers. The investigation was conducted by the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, and lasted for more than 2 months. The officers involved range in rank from captain to brigadier general and were detained over what the military initially described as indiscipline and breach of service regulations. Earlier reports had alleged that the officers were involved in a coup plot against the Tinubu administration. At the time, both the defense headquarters and the presidency publicly denied that there was any coup attempt. However, sources familiar with the investigation now say the report submitted to the president indicted the officers and recommended disciplinary action in line with military procedures. According to these sources, final decisions on sanctions, including whether the officers will face court-martial or other disciplinary measures, now rest with the president as commander-in-chief of the armed forces. These are the facts that have been officially confirmed so far. This development did not happen suddenly. The detention of the officers dates back to October 2025, when reports first emerged alleging a coup plot within the military ranks. At that time, official statements from the defense headquarters and the presidency denied any coup attempt, describing the arrests as internal disciplinary matters. Over the following 2 months, the Defense Intelligence Agency carried out detailed investigations, including interrogations and internal reviews. The submission of the report in January 2026 marks the conclusion of that process and shifts the matter from investigation to decision-making. This timing is important because it places responsibilities squarely on the civilian leadership to determine the next steps. It also explains why the narrative has evolved from outright denial to acknowledgement of serious internal misconduct. The real issue here is not the number of officers involved or the specific allegations against them. It is how a professional military manages internal discipline while remaining firmly under civilian authority. In any democracy, the armed forces are expected to resolve internal misconduct through clear procedures, not secrecy or prolonged detention. When allegations escalate from indiscipline to something as serious as a coup plot, the stakes change significantly. Transparency, due process, and clear communication become essential. The submission of this report to the president highlights the balance that must be maintained, ensuring national security, while also preserving the rule of law and public confidence. This moment tests whether Nigeria's civil-military framework can address serious internal threats without undermining democratic norms. The real issue here is not the number of officers involved or the specific allegations against them. It is how a professional military manages internal discipline while remaining firmly under civilian authority. In any democracy, the armed forces are expected to resolve internal misconduct through clear procedures, not secrecy or prolonged detention. When allegations escalate from indiscipline to something as serious as a coup plot, the stakes change significantly. Transparency, due process, and clear communication become essential. The submission of this report to the president highlights the balance that must be maintained, ensuring national security, while also preserving the rule of law and public confidence. This moment tests whether Nigeria's civil-military framework can address serious internal threats without undermining democratic norms. While the report has now been submitted, several important questions remain unanswered. There has been no detailed public explanation of the specific findings of the investigation or the standards used to determine culpability. It is also unclear why initial official statements strongly denied the existence of a coup plot, only for later briefings to suggest a more serious internal threat. Another issue not fully addressed is due process. Prolonged detention without formal charges or court-martial proceedings raises questions about timelines and legal safeguards within military justice. There is also limited information on health and welfare conditions of the detained officers, despite reports that some may be unwell. Finally, the report does not yet clarify accountability beyond the accused officers. If failures occurred in oversight or early intervention, those gaps have not been publicly acknowledged. These silences matter because they shape whether this process is seen as corrective and professional or opaque and reactive. For ordinary Nigerians, this development goes beyond military procedure or internal discipline. It speaks directly to stability and trust. The military plays a central role in maintaining national security, and any sign of internal discontent or misconduct naturally raises public concern. At the same time, Nigerians expect that serious allegations are handled lawfully and transparently, without prolonged uncertainty or conflicting explanations. How this case is resolved will influence public confidence not only in the armed forces, but also in civilian oversight and democratic control. For many citizens, the key concern is simple: that institutions responsible for protecting the country remain professional, accountable, and firmly under constitutional authority. As the report now sits with the president, attention will shift to what actions follow. The first thing to watch is the nature of the president's decision. Whether the officers are court-martialed, sanctioned administratively, or released will signal how seriously the findings are being treated. The second is process and transparency. Clear communication on next steps will help reduce speculation and restore confidence after months of uncertainty. Another key point is timing. Prolonged delays at this stage could deepen concerns about due process and fairness within the military justice system. Finally, Nigerians should watch for institutional lessons. Any reforms or clarifications on how such investigations are handled in the future will show whether this case leads to lasting improvements or remains an isolated incident. These developments will determine whether this episode strengthens discipline and accountability or leaves lingering questions within the system. The submission of this report marks a decisive moment and manages sensitive issues within its military. What matters now is not speculation, but how the findings are handled. With clarity, fairness, and respect for constitutional authority, a transparent and lawful response can reinforce confidence in both the armed forces and civilian oversight. A vague or delayed response risks prolonging uncertainty and weakening trust. At its core, this episode raises a simple but important question. Can Nigeria address serious internal military allegations in a way that strengthens discipline while upholding democratic accountability? The answer will shape how this moment is remembered.